Hi everyone, Jennifer Davis here. All right, give me just a second. There we go. I had a couple of people that wanted me to tag them on this video so they don't miss it, because it's going to be an important topic that I think if you don't relate to it, you know someone who would. And let's do a quick disclaimer. I have a busy household tonight, so you may hear children come in the background. I did lock my door though, so at least no one will come busting into the room as I talk to you about post-traumatic stress. So I do want to say this. I want to remind you that I'm not a therapist. In no way does the information that I give you replace proper therapy for mental health, because mental health is slowly becoming a very common thing with most people, and working with a specialist or professional on it is always the best thing that you can do, and then using your essential oils to support you through the process is really the goal here. So what I am hoping to do is give you some information to help you feel more empowered as you go through the process of healing from PTSD, or helping someone else or guide someone else through that process. So there was so much information that I wanted to share, but I feel like I could get a little bit overcomplicated and maybe even going beyond my scope of like knowledge. So I just want to be careful there and just give you just some basic information, because if you have been diagnosed with PTSD or just post-traumatic stress, whether it's you know, long term or more of a simple one-time experience that caused it, or one-time trauma. So there's a couple of things I'm going to define just so we can get on the same page. But first, okay, so I've got some notes. I want to make sure I stick to them so I don't end up going off into a direction I don't mean to go. So, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? It is often, like, we're used to hearing about shell shock, and I didn't get a chance to like really look into the history of it, but we often associate PTSD with soldiers returning from war, and that's not always the case. So they've actually noticed that more and more people are struggling or suffering from PTSD as a result of just any kind of traumatic event. And I just want to remind you, it's not a sign of weakness or poor character. And I can remember a lot of people have said that in the past, and even I've probably been guilty of that. You know, I've often wondered, why are some people more wired that way and others aren't? A really good example of that is my dad served in Vietnam, and many men came back who experienced the same things he did with PTSD, as where my dad did not have PTSD. And I've often wondered, like, why is that? Why are some people affected and others not? I really don't know. I think that's a really interesting question. But I do want to point out, it's not a sign of weakness or poor character. It's just everybody is wired differently, and nobody knows what their trauma response is going to be until they have one. And many people's trauma response are completely different. So it was actually officially recognized as a mental health disorder in about 1980. So it's kind of a recent thing that it's been recognized. And the importance of recognizing any mental health disorder, or any disease really, is because it allows people to explore and research and recognize it as something that needs to be dealt with. So that's really the importance. It's kind of a validation thing for people as well who are struggling with these things. So people who suffer from PTSD, they frequently have reoccurring memories of the stressful event. They often report feeling anxious or scared, even when there is no danger. They have intense flashbacks or terrifying nightmares. That can be symptom as well. And then also a faulty flight or fight response. These symptoms are thought to be a result of changes in the brain and body that affect hormone production. I did briefly read over some information that PTSD can be a contributing factor to autoimmune disease and infertility issues. So if you're struggling with those, maybe dig deep inside your brain and see, you know, maybe there's a trauma in there that you need to be addressing so that those things can over time start to correct themselves. But the hormone production that's actually affected is the adrenaline. It causes the brain to respond incorrectly to situations that trigger the individual. Okay, so I'm going to kind of get a little personal here. So I struggle with a form of PTS. So I don't have the disorder aspect. I just have the post-traumatic stress. And it's the specific one called betrayal trauma. Betrayal trauma is a like reoccurring, like consistent trauma that occurs in a person's life, and the person who's traumatizing you is somebody who's really close to you, who you rely on for your basic needs in life, like life support. So it can be a parent, it could be the person who feeds you and clothes you, it could be a spouse. Lots of spouses or women, more so women than men, are finding that betrayal trauma comes along with after a disclosure of an affair or infidelity, or even an addiction that might have been there that they didn't know. And that brings me to my next point. So PTSD is a cluster of symptoms. I'm not going to get into all the different ones, but it's basically the inability to process a trauma that occurred after a life-threatening situation or a disruption in life that affects normal functioning. So it could be the death of a loved one. You can have post-traumatic stress from that. It could be, like I said, the disclosure of information that you didn't have before that actually really changed your life. So when a spouse has an addiction you didn't know about, or an affair, or something like that. It could be the consistent neglect from a parent. Like, even those things can cause it. And I just want to remind you that traumas aren't necessarily like big, grand things. Many people experience post-traumatic stress after a trauma that's life-threatening, which it could be like a disaster, you know, people who have been affected by hurricanes and tornadoes or flooding or whatever. I had a friend who lived in an area where the creek, it was a creek really, that ran through the city. It rained so much that it flooded, and it came into the street, and then it actually came up into their yard, and their home was split level, so they had bedrooms downstairs that were half underground, and the water actually came in there, and mom and dad woke up when they felt wet in bed because the water had risen up past the bed, and her post-traumatic stress was that her babies could have been sleeping in that bed. They had just, that could have been her kid's sleeping room. So whenever it rained, she would get that trauma back. It would just reintroduce that and trigger it. So trauma can be something really small. It could be the time when somebody bullied you as a child and it affected you moving forward. So that would be a disruption in life. It could be the time that, you know, your mom told you you didn't look good in the outfit you were in, and, you know, or the time that your parents ignored you instead of, you know, spending time with you, and that made you feel unloved. And if that happened consistently, that can be a reoccurring trauma that then over time creates the post-traumatic stress. Usually, though, post-traumatic stress does accompany a more life-threatening situation, and the betrayal trauma can then, you know, be a result of something a little bit different than that. So just do want to clarify that. Now, there are lots of ways that you can treat PTSD. We're going to talk about the oil aspect, but I want to remind you that essential oils do not treat, cure, or heal. They assist the body's ability to heal. So it doesn't replace working with a specialist or therapist, like I said, and there's several different therapies that they use. The most effective one that I know of is cognitive behavior therapy. You can look that one up, and then you have like EMDR is another one that's in there, which is rapid eye movement. Causes you to use both sides of your brain so that it can help your body process a trauma. And then, let's see, I think those were the only two that were in my lists that I see here. Yes, and of course there's medication that if your therapist that you're working with feels that you need that, then you can make that decision. So the goal actually of using essential oils is to put you in a place where you are getting past avoidance, because usually when there's a trauma like this that affects you on this level, then that actually creates this avoidance cycle, because you don't want to face the fear that is there that may be triggered as you start to process it. So the essential oils can actually help to reduce, well, let me just say this the way I have it written down. The essential oil compounds have an effect on the limbic system, and that actually can help to calm the fear physiologically, sorry, long word for me. And then that's going to help reduce the avoidance cycle so that we can actually address the fear cycle so that we can start to process it out. So I always think that's really interesting how the essential oils really get into the brain. I mean, if you think about it, PTSD is actually a condition of the brain where, we need to work where it's either kind of like when we're sick or we're injured, we typically use an essential oil somewhere in our body if we have if we're sick or if we have an injury. So what we have to do is actually reframe our mindset and understand that the brain is a body system too, and it can be injured, it can be damaged, whether it's through like an actual injury where you hit your head or you have a concussion, or you have an experience, because there's a fabulous TED Talk on brain scans, actually. It's really interesting in how your brain can actually have injury as a result of different types of mental health disorders and traumas that occur. Or an injury can actually cause those things to happen in the brain as well. So there's all these different ways the brain can be injured, and essential oils can really help to support the healing process in that. So what's cool is that using the essential oils allow us to talk about the trauma in very small steps. So if you do decide to get, work with a therapist, then using your essential oils are just going to help you go through the process the way you need to go through. Okay, so let's talk about the essential oils that you can use. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe about 6 different ones, some that you might already actually be using. So the first one is actually turmeric. That's one of our newer oils that came out last fall, so it's not even been a year. And oftentimes we use turmeric to help with inflammation. We know that it's really good for that, and many people use the herbs or they rub it on topically, and then the essential oil can actually be used internally as well. So it supports a healthy inflammatory response, which is a sign that the body is trying to fight something or heal something. So that applies to the brain too. So there are studies, let's see, yeah, there are 2 studies that that turmeric has been used in PTSD studies, and both of them help the anxiety-like behavior that comes along with PTSD. The first one is just straight turmeric was used, and then the second one was actually one of the constituents in it, which is curcumin, and it also helps anxiety-like behavior. But what they notice is it helps reduce the freeze response in the fear conditioning and reduces the anxiety that surrounds that. So I thought that was really interesting. And so the next one, actually, I'm going to talk about this and I'll tell you how to use them. The next one, before I go there, let me tell you what turmeric is good for emotionally. So it's good for when you have somebody who has been abused, betrayed, damaged, like those feelings of damaged, afraid, and hopelessness. So that's the emotional uses for that oil. And then the other oil that goes with it is cardamom. So cardamom is actually in the Breathe blend, but you can also buy it separately. And we know that cardamom is good for respiratory support. It supports the smooth muscles that line the lungs and the intestines. So it's good for not only respiratory, but digestive as well. But in this case, cardamom, there's a study that shows that it helps reduce the anxiety-like behaviors that go with PTSD. So there's another one for that. And cardamom is good for the heart, and it helps to open up the respiratory system so that you can breathe. And the heart and the lungs is where forgiveness and grief all tend to settle, which those are feelings that come along with trauma. No matter what kind of trauma it is, there's probably a level of forgiveness that needs to happen in there. But don't worry, I'm not going to make you go and sit down and actually forgive the person that traumatized you. But it can just naturally help your body get into that place where you need to be. So what you would do with those two oils is you get yourself a veggie cap, and you can order them on your account. They're like $4 for 160. You pop that cap open and you drop 2 drops of turmeric in there and 1 drop of cardamom, and you can take those twice a day. So you would do 2 capsules twice a day to help with those particular things right there. And then the next oil is jasmine. So when you have PTSD, there's you have your heightened responses, which those are your really up emotions like fear and like especially when you're being triggered. And then we have those down emotions. That's like loneliness and hopelessness and depression and all those things that go there. So jasmine is going to help calm the heightened stress response. So, and it's great for little kids as well, which we're going to talk more about little kids next week. Jasmine is also a great oil to use when your trauma is sexual abuse. And then also with self-acceptance, which often comes along with sexual abuse trauma. Juniper berry. So that's the next one. We often know juniper berry is kind of the oil of night. It's really good for night terrors. We use it a lot on little kids in that instance. It calms the heightened stress response as well, so it's calming, okay? It's good for nightmares, irrational fears, disrupted sleep, and avoidance as well. So the irrational fear is actually really important, and let me just mention, oftentimes people with PTSD or post-traumatic stress, they experience intrusive thoughts. That's one that I actually had as a result of birth trauma. I'm only assuming because that's when it started. And the intrusive thoughts were really bad. I remember not being able to sleep for days on end because every time I closed my eyes and I would start to get to that place of going to sleep, just like I could visualize things. And, you know, it was really hard for me to, I wish I would have known about essential oils back then, because that was like, gosh, that was like 13 years ago. That was before, almost 14 years ago. It was before I was using essential oils and really knew what aromatherapy was. Otherwise, I would have totally been using it because I use it now and I know I don't even have that issue. It's very, very rare. Also, when you're being triggered, juniper berry is going to help with that irrational fear. So, for example, my friend, when it starts to rain or thunder, you know, that fear would come in. And it's not completely irrational in her sense. I mean, it could rain enough to where the flooding could occur, but in many cases, those trigger responses are irrational fears because you're not in that danger right now. So, you know, using that juniper berry would really help. And then the next one is cypress. Cypress is actually our oil of the month. So if you order 125 PB on your loyalty rewards this month, then you can get cypress for free. So a great way to get a free oil. Cypress deals with feelings of fear and fearfulness. Also, cypress is really good at helping you let go of the past. So if it's an issue that happened in the past, you're having a hard time letting go of it, you know, using that cypress oil to help you get into that place of processing that out would be helpful. You can diffuse these essential oils. Jasmine actually is a great skin oil, so you can use that one. I actually really like using that one at night in the diffuser. So it's a really nice floral smelling oil. So, oils that reduce cortisol levels, and I've talked about cortisol and stress before. Cortisol is a stress hormone that completely wreaks havoc on your body. So PTSD can actually cause health issues to arise. And so just reducing that cortisol every single day with your essential oils is going to benefit you. So I talk about lavender and balance as being the top 5 daily oils. So hopefully you're using those 2 oils already on a regular basis. Those are going to reduce that cortisol level because they both contain an ingredient called linalool. Linalool is the constituent that helps reduce cortisol in the body. And then the other oil, which is a really good, like if you're only to use one oil to help you resolve trauma, it would be the oil blend Console. Console is a blend of oils that help with traumatization, help support you as you work through it. It gives you emotional comfort from loss, grief, tragedy. So it's a really, really good oil for that. And then citrus oils are the ones that you're gonna want to grab when you're feeling those down emotions as a result of PTSD. The feeling of hopelessness, despair, and depression, and and grief, and just overall sadness that might accompany PTSD specifically. So remember, the goal to all of this is not to help you overcome PTSD. It's only to help support your healing as you work through to process these things out. So if you're not working with a therapist, use your essential oils, get out your journal. Some other really good coping mechanisms are eating healthy, specifically plant-based, and then exercise. So exercise actually gets your brain engaged in bilateral movements. I mean, pretty much every exercise I can think of, running, biking. And so what that basically means is when you're moving the sides of your body, so like let's imagine you're running or you're pumping your bike pedals, okay? So that's activating the different sides of your body, and it's getting those bilateral movements going back and forth in the brain, and that is helping your brain to process things that it wasn't processing before. So people who are immobile, or you're feeling those down emotions like depression and you're not getting out of bed, they're more likely to succumb to those more serious side effects or symptoms that go along with mental health. So by getting up and getting moving, then that will help you. Your essential oils can put you in a place or a frame to get you to do that. So it's kind of like that friend that comes along and pulls you out of bed and like makes you go to the gym, or sprays you down with cold water like we see in the movies. Essential oils can really fill that need for you. So definitely be using them. It's really hard though when you're dealing with mental health and PTSD specifically, because you're afraid and you're triggered constantly, and it's really hard to go, okay, I really should use my oils. In my case with betrayal trauma, and a handful of you on here probably know my story as far as that goes. And so essential oils have been really, really helpful for me in helping me to process how I'm feeling about it, help me to safely relive the different traumas that I've got in my life so that I can objectively start to unpack the feelings that I have around them, so I can move forward in life not feeling so triggered and traumatized all the time every time I think about him, or experience something that puts me back in that place. And so then last, the other thing I want to share with you, and this is what really kind of really lays on my heart a lot, is that I really do believe that we go through everything for a reason, and finding meaning in that reason, even if that is a really bad experience that you had, but finding meaning in it is going to really give you this sense of purpose and self-worth, because self-worth and self-pity really go along with a lot of these types of disorders. So finding that meaning and that purpose behind why you went through what you went through, what can you become? Who can you help? How can you make a difference in the world? Oftentimes I find that attending a support group with other people who have the same experience and are at different levels of healing can be really empowering. Telling your story. Don't necessarily have to tell it when you're super triggered and it's really new for you, but giving yourself a chance to process it out and then telling your story, other people are going to identify for you, and you're going to find a sense of purpose in that. And then the other thing is, a lot of times what happens is when someone has PTSD and they're triggered, they're automatically taken to the past and they are experiencing the trauma again, emotionally and subconsciously. And so finding an anchor for you, and with children specifically, that anchor could be a blanket, it could be a special toy, or it can be an essential oil. We actually have a blend called Anchor. I think Balance is also a really good anchor essential oil because it's grounding. But finding that anchor, and whenever you're feeling that way, grab that essential oil, breathe it in, grab that, special thing. It could be a special necklace, or maybe, in some cases it could be a really comfortable jacket or a sweater, or gosh, for me, sometimes it's my wool socks to just bring me that comfort. But finding that anchor so that when you're experiencing the past again and you're reliving it, then you can pull yourself back to the present and remember that that's not happening to you right now. You're in the present, you're safe, you're taken care of, so that you can start to unpack those feelings again in a very healthy, safe way. So the oils, just to recap, that we talked about today were turmeric, cardamom, putting those in a capsule and taking them twice a day. We've got our jasmine and our juniper berry and our cypress, and then our oils that we should be using all the time, which is lavender, balance, and citrus oils. And then, of course, the oil Console, which is great for all ages, for people who are dealing with past traumas and are very stressed out about them. So I hope this was helpful. Feel free to ask questions. If it's something I can't answer, I may tag Meredith and let her help me out there. But next week, we're going to be talking about mental health with children. And I actually have no experience with this, so I'll be doing tons of research and pulling off testimonies from people. And hopefully we'll be able to get some really good education for you. So I hope everyone has a great evening, and we'll see you later.